I've said this years ago and I've said it so many times. Where a person grows up doesn't mean anything. Because it doesn't. Because areas change. A good example is that my grandmother grew up in Leichhardt, 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt. Her husband grew up in Balmain. So they're all from Balmain, Roselle. Now, when it was fashionable to move from the city, because the city was the Bronx, so the city started turning in the like at the end of the 50s. So after the war, the city was turning. Okay, and it was fashionable to move to these brand new suburban areas. So dad's parents moved from the inner city to Parramatta. Mum's parents moved to Blacktown in 1962. Was it not? Anyway, it was the early 60s they moved there. They were the second owner of a brand new house. Nan said the man who owned it before them hadn't lived in it for a year, so they bought a brand new house. Okay, the only reason they went to Medowie, which is up near Newcastle, was because that place they lived on at Medowie was owned. I think Nan said it was from memory. It was Pop's brother Raymond. Pop's brother Raymond lived in King's Cross. He owned a property up near Medowie. When they were saving money for the deposit on the place in Blacktown, they were living there cheaper than what they were paying in the inner city, and that's what that Nan said they were there for. Because basically Nan wanted to move to the suburbs. She didn't want to raise her family in a terraced house. Nan said, like, no, ridiculous. I've already lived in one. Like, she goes, no, I want a front yard, I want a backyard. And when they moved there, it was shopping centres. There was air conditioned shopping centres. There was shopping malls. There was, everything to do. There was ice skating rinks down in First Avenue. She goes, it was beautiful. Like, all the old area there was built in the 60s. That big shopping centre that has been built over now was there in the 60s. West Point was there. That was the St. Patrick's Mall, which was actually built in the 80s over the church. That was St. Patrick's Church. That came later. But there was all shopping malls. It was all brand new, beautiful area that you didn't have in the city. You were somebody. Now, when we were trying to get Nan to sell, that's not, Nan kept focusing on. She goes, but when we moved, I said, but Nan, now it's low income housing area. They've brought up everybody's acreage of land. So it was acres of land where you actually lived like you were living. Well, it was like Rudy Hill felt like you're part of the Hills District. We used to go to Jamboree in Castle Hill and ride horses around Castle Hill. Like it was beautiful. The horse stub we had in Rudy Hill was beautiful, but that was brought up by developers. Like Mum sold it to developers that built low income housing on it. So where I grew up doesn't exist anymore. Nothing looks the same. It's changed. Like walking distance from the horse stud I lived in, I could walk down the road and get coffee at a cafe. And back then it was beautiful. It was safe. I'm talking about being a 7-year-old kid walking down the street, which you wouldn't send a 7-year-old kid walking down that street now. So we would walk down the road there in Rudy Hill to Rudy Hill Road and go get a coffee, go get fish and chips from the Greeks down the road. It was beautiful. Not now. Things change. So you need to look at it, what was the area like when I lived there. It wasn't like it is now, that's for sure. Because what it was like was my neighbours had thoroughbred hacks, we had horses, other places had horses. It wasn't until they started buying like the land next door to Mum's and they brought that land and they built units on it. And Mum was like, no, that's it. I'm not staying here. Then they did it to someone else's property. So here's the thing, if you ever look on social media at the moment, you'll see that the Zemets out in the suburb, the Zemets still have their farm and they're built in. So Zemets were the last ones to sell. Okay? Everybody sold like my mother did and moved. They moved down south to Wollongong, they moved up north to other areas. They left the area because the social dynamic was changing. It went from being affluent people that could afford to have a horse truck worth just as much as their house. It went from people that had thoroughbred hacks and were competing at nationals and royals to being a low social, area. Because people's land was getting brought up by developers, and that one house, like we had one house on a big property, has now got 30 houses on that property. Okay, they turned the area into low socioeconomic area. People with money left, people that don't have money stayed. My nan never wanted to move. Okay, my grandfather wanted to move back into the city so many times on his deathbed. Okay, he wanted, he died in Concord Hospital. All Pop ever wanted to do was move back to Balmain. He hated living in the suburbs. He hated it. He absolutely hated it, and he said so. He wished he'd never left Balmain. He loved Balmain, but your nan wouldn't raise a family in a terraced house. Now, that's the facts. I didn't live there during the 90s the way it is. I lived in another affluent area around affluent people that were multimillionaires. My neighbour was a multimillionaire. I left, like Mum moved, and besides Mum's biggest mistake was a second husband, we still lived around decent people and got to, be around decent people. I'm busy, Baxter. You can wait now. Finished? Dad's area is the same thing. It's nice. I'm not saying that anything that's not true. Dad lives in Hillcrest Road, Empire Bay, as long as Mum's lived in New England. These areas have changed. Now, people moved back to the city, even old families that are originally from city areas that left, they left when it became poor. Like, people moved out of Redfern years ago because of because of the Abos. People left because of the Aboriginals. There was a lot of people. Redfern used to be a beautiful area. Then they moved the Aboriginals into the area and it turned to shit. Redfern, when my grandmother lived in Leichhardt, was a beautiful area. All those white people left Redfern because the Abos just destroyed it. And that's the truth. That's how I grew up. My nana and my pop would tell you how beautiful Redfern was before they moved the Abos here. It was a beautiful area. Now, people that are originally from inner city suburbs of Sydney or had family heritage and history when the inner city suburbs were beautiful started moving back, okay? And other people from other nice areas of the eastern suburbs started trickling down and gentrifying these horrible areas like they did to Surrey Hills. I moved into Surrey Hills 20 years ago, okay? And it was a beautiful area. The only thing that's ever destroyed any of these areas are the fact that they've moved these low socioeconomic, uneducated, barbaric people into them. And that's true. You can ask Lola if she's still alive and she'll tell you how beautiful Redfern was until they moved the Abos into the area.